Okay, so we're live. I don't know if we have anybody with us, but we'll see if we can pull in the hearing. So we go to present. If we go to share screen, we go to share screen and we go to that and we share. And we apologize for that. We hope people come back. Hey, is anybody out there? Give us a shout out. Give us a shout out if you're out there. Give us a shout out. Something happened and the live got cut off. We can't get back into it, but here we are. And why don't I hear it? I need to hear. Oh, because I paused it. That's why.
The probability of it coming up heads every time is much different. Probability is a mathematical statement, a quantitative measure. And so opportunities to be seen are dependent on the
So did you figure out why you don't have audio?
We measure opportunities to be seen for, say, newspapers based on their circulation. These are paid subscribers who you then infer pay to receive that news, they consume that news. Television has Nielsen audience figures. Nielsen measures those in smaller markets quarterly, in larger markets.
Okay, we lost all of our people. If there's anybody out there, we're sorry something happened. We got cut off and we can't start up again. So if there's anyone out there, what?
Be measured quarterly.
Where does it say that?
So opportunities to be seen are the possibility that people in that county would see it. It's the volume of those opportunities that creates the potential opportunity or probability that they've been exposed to X number of articles or media mentions, discrete articles, stories about this topic you're having us track. The numbers reflected on the pie chart show that over half of those opportunities to be seen reside within Latah County, nearly 60% or 57.03%. The opportunities to be seen per person in Ada County is 31.2%, not quite half, but nearly half the opportunities. And that's a simple mathematical function of all the media exposure in that county divided by the population, or in this case, potentially age eligible for jury population.
And in terms of the green sliver there, Canyon County is close to Ada. And so if we assume that Canyon County residents might review Ada County news with its population of 180,000, is the dilution of Latah County or the dilution of Canyon County still significantly greater than the saturation in Latah County?
If I understand the question correctly, how I'm going to answer that is Canyon, and I would also say Bannock, unless you don't want me to mention Bannock, but the media exposure specific to those counties is statistically insignificant relative to the rest of Idaho, Latah County, Ada County. In fact, if you combined all those two and grouped them into either one of those, it would change the inferences that we make on the data between Ada and Latah.
Can you turn to the next slide now? Tell the court which line represents which county and the color.
Sure, the darker line, the red line is maybe the easier one to see. That's Ada County, and the darker line, it's a blue or might look black on the screen, is Latah County.
And for Judge,
that looks like our analytics here, up and down and up and down and up and down, and ever since we crashed, more down than up.
For your purposes, this is C1 that was filed with the reply, which is an update from the original memorandum to include a more recent date, the date that we filed, August 19th, the reply. So I don't know what one you're looking at, but the one on your computer screen is the one that we're talking about right now.
Thank you to tell me that.
Could you explain, Mr. Murphy, what the purpose of showing this over time does for the court?
Yeah, one of the more interesting charts that we develop for our clients is media coverage over time. And in this case, we're looking at January 1st of 23 through August 19th of 24. If you look at the red line, which is Ada County, you can see that aside from May 2023, it often lags by volume of coverage behind Latah County, in most cases by 50% or more of the media coverage. So if I rephrase that in maybe simpler terms, the media exposure in Ada County for the majority of time between January 2023 and August, continuing into August 2024, has been far less in Ada County than in Utah County.
And what can you tell from the spikes? Have you correlated those with case events?
Sure. It might be convenient to look at it analogous to maybe a stock portfolio. Oftentimes a peak is followed by a valley, unless you invest in NVIDIA. But May 2023, you see 198 stories. I believe that highest peak for Ada County was the indictment is what's driving that peak. Now, when you compare that to Latah County, I can see that moving towards that indictment, there was ongoing media coverage. So while Ada spiked, it had a quick uptick and what I would call a fairly slow decay because of the extreme nature of the topic of the story. When we look at Latah County, it is more consistent. And after the indictment, Latah County surpasses media coverage over time consistently up through August of this year.
And this was filed with the court on August 19th, and we're here on August 29th. Have you been able to review and see what's going on with the coverage regarding this case right now as we sit here?
Yeah, I took a look Tuesday. I started seeing the media exposure ticking up again. It was fairly high yesterday. In my professional opinion, I would wager it's going to be extremely high today. And that's a function of public interest in an extreme news story.
Okay, he's comparing with a line chart the saturation of media coverage, comparing Latah County, which of course is Moscow, Idaho, with Ada counties. I apologize. Thank you, people, for coming back. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell anyone that we had a little bit of a technical glitch, but we're back. But I don't think that we were able to notify everyone that we're in a slightly different live stream now, but thank you for coming back. I don't know why they're going through all of this. The state of Idaho prosecutor consented to allow this into evidence, and so this is all in evidence. There's really no need to go into the weeds with all of this. There's no jury, just a judge. The judge can scan through it as he wants. It's been admitted to evidence. I think they're probably just doing it to make a record for the appeal that will come if the venue change is not granted, and if Mr. Kohberger is found guilty. I mean, there will be an appeal. There's no question about that. So I think that's the only reason they're going into this depth. I don't think it's necessary. They could argue on the pleadings.
A story, you may have heard the phrase, this story has legs. A story that is extreme, unique, atypical, has greater legs than, say, high school football scores you hear on the 10 o'clock news on a Friday night.
I know that a lot of podcasters, when they play this stuff back, not in a live situation, they double time it or times and a half it in terms of the speed that they play this stuff back. And that would make more sense, but you can't times and a half or double speed reality. You can't do it.
Would have a very fast decay of memory on consuming viewers. This type of story will remain on the mind and be of interest up to and beyond the conclusion of of this case, however that might be.
Would you flip to the next slide? This green line, what does it show?
It shows somewhat of a similar pattern across the entire country. It's the same date range. It's also showing media coverage over time, but it's looking at all media exposure nationwide. So while you feel things very acutely locally, even a story as extreme as this garners less interest the first.
Let me condense all of this. Media coverage goes up and down from one day to the next. Next slide, please.
So you get away from the local community, and to look at this on a nationwide chart like this, you can see it remains in the mind, and these are large numbers. The indictment of over 13,268 or 13,268 media mentions on May 2023 shows that the nation was interested.
Did the judge disappear?
In it, but that decay has been faster on a nationwide level, just because, according to the decay of engagement on news stories, the further you get away, the less. I don't mean to sound callous, but the less interesting it is if you're in Florida than if you are in Latah County or something.
So in terms of looking at decay, I want to ask this in the context of the story waning for the court's purposes of projecting, say, months down the line next year at trial. Based on the data that you're seeing, is this story waning in the news?
No. In fact, if we could make one more line on any of these media coverage over time charts, you would see an upslope on the first one, this chart. You already see it ticking up when I compare the Latah.
Red, is this fascinating to you?
I still don't know what's happening. I kind of just sat down.
That's okay. No, you missed the first hour of it, but this is like watching grass grow or hubcaps rust.
I was gonna say they're kind of going in circles here.
Well, it's not circles so much as they submitted a whole ton of evidence. They submitted a 300-page document called Exhibit C, and Exhibit C was the True Scope Media Company's study of all the coverage in the Kohberger case. And we all know there's been a lot. I mean, I don't know why they need to go into this depth. The judge has already agreed to accept this into evidence. And again, there's a thing when you go into court, you can do one of two things. You can have an evidentiary hearing where you put your witnesses on the stand and you ask them questions and they answer them. You ask them more questions, they answer. That's called an evidentiary hearing, and that's fine. There's another thing you can do when things are already in evidence. You can argue on the pleadings. Now, you can't go outside of what is in the pleadings, but in 300 pages of data like the chart we're looking at now, you could argue all afternoon, but it would be a much more efficient way to present all of this information than to simply throw graph after graph and chart after chart, because I guarantee you that the judge is not impressed, and I guarantee you that no one in that courtroom is really impressed with this type of a presentation. So those are the two ways to present material to a court, is either arguing it on the pleadings or doing an evidentiary hearing. And I mean, I guess, to me, it doesn't make any sense. What do you think?
I'm gonna die on that hill that they need to stop using such really, really logical evidence like graphs and stuff, because it gets more emotions running the trial,
So if you were the lawyer for the defense, how would you tell the judge, how would you convey all this information? I mean, the headline in the news today will be: attorneys argue to court for change of venue, show massive publicity in Latah County. That's going to be the headline in the news tonight. I know, because I used to write headlines. But if you were the attorney presenting this to the judge, how would you present it?
I mean, I feel like both sides need to get every aspect of an argument in there that they're not getting. Either one side's being a little bit too much logic and the other side's too much emotion. It seemed like a healthy balance of both.
Right, but what I'm asking is like, how would you present all of this data? They've got 300 pages of data on coverage. How would you present that to the court, other than throwing the document on his desk and saying, "Hey, judge, here"?
I mean, I don't. How would I present it?
Yeah,
Maybe we can do like a slideshow at like 1.5 speed.
yeah. This is too slow. Oh, the judge is back. Look, there he is. There's the judge. He's back. Looked like he disappeared for a little while to me. It looked like he. All right, I'm going to turn the volume back up. Well, listen, I don't know what the heck's happening here. So let's turn the volume back on.
When it says Latah County and Ada County, are you limiting that to the boundaries of the specific county, or are you talking about the broader designation?
Looks like the judge is writing a letter to his cousin.
What we're looking at is media mentioned that impacted the county.
The county specifically?
Right, so.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
No, I think the judge is making his shopping list. We need potatoes. We need hamburger rolls.
Of 2023.
Correct.
So December of 2022, Mr. Kohberger was arrested. Were you able to make any determinations of media coverage in December of 2022 at the time Mr. Kohberger was arrested?
We were not engaged nor tracking the media.
Okay. And that's not possible to go back and track that.
We can do what's called a back search, but we can't. Certain media types have expired. Online news links, social media might have been taken down. So you can do it. I wouldn't say I would present it with confidence.
Thank you.
I could show you a number.
Thank you. So fair to say, though, that there probably would have been a pretty substantial spike at that time as well.
I would say yes.
And possibly, although you can't say for sure, that spike could have been even higher than any of the other spikes on this graph, possibly.
The possibility exists.
Thank you, sir. So for the first 6 months on this chart of volume of media coverage over time for Latah and Ada County had more intense media coverage in January, February, March, April, May, and then June, and then in July, there's a crossover where Latah County is higher than Ada County. So fair to say for that first 6 months, Ada County did have at times fairly significantly more media coverage than Latah County.
Correct.
Okay. And council talked with you about these peaks and how they correspond with specific events in the case, such as court hearings. Would you expect that if the court were to make a decision to start closing certain hearings, particularly evidentiary hearings as we approach trial, that would be a mitigating factor that would decrease the amount of media coverage in this case?
I can't say yes or no on that. I would say it depends. If those closed meetings were a public record, then the media most likely that's following this would still have a high probability of reporting on it. They may just not have any image or interviews or some of the elements that go into a more engaging news story.
So the coverage might be less intense.
Intense is a qualification that I'm not able to make. I can't tell you how intense something impacts you as a viewer or a consumer.
Sure, thank you.
Wait, what'd you say, Red?
I just don't like when the judge looks at the camera, feeling like I'm on trial right now. Just making eye contact directly with me.
Is he that's a good point, but is he looking at the camera, or is the camera right behind the person he's looking at? And he's it looks like he's looking over at Attorney Masath. That's what it looks like to me. And it looks to me like the camera is behind her. So I don't know if he's staring at the camera or her and the camera's behind her. I don't know. I really don't. I wouldn't read it. I wouldn't read a whole lot into that. I mean, I don't know.
And I noticed in that chart of Latah County and Ada County coverage that in the last couple of months, that coverage intensity in both of those counties has become pretty close again. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I don't know if it means anything or not, but Mr. Kohberger is not in his usual tie and suit. Looks like he has a jacket and a blue polo shirt. They have been dragging him out here in a suit and tie, and people said, there's really no need for that. I mean, yes, when he's in front of a jury, yeah, you dress him in street clothes, but so I don't know. Just a comment. I don't know if it means anything.
Yes.
And so based on these charts, it's really not beyond the realm of possibility that Ada County could again surpass Latah County in coverage, at least at certain points, correct?
Again, there's an equal chance of possibility. The probability based on the data, I would say is no, in my professional opinion. We've already seen an uptick, and it appears that in Ada County, the news is much more focused and attentive, even to what I might consider a less weighted story. I think there was a story recently about a memorial garden or something that this county garnered quite a bit of media exposure. But that's logical. Sure.
Well, in June of 2024, it looks like they got so close that they were just 2 points apart. Is that correct? Latah County just 2 points above?
Yeah.
And you're not willing to testify that there's a possibility that Ada County could potentially surpass Latah County in the future?
I'll absolutely guarantee that possibilities are always equally available.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the plan.
I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Beatty. Ms. Matthew.
Mr. Murphy, in terms of this discussion on Ada versus Latah, you mentioned the Nielsen rankings. Could you please tell the court the difference between what the Nielsen ranking is, and then I'll follow up with what Latah's is, and what Ada County's is. So what's a Nielsen?
Maybe it's just because I'm a media student, but the Nielsen ratings have been around since the 1950s. And I think everybody knows what the Nielsen ratings are. So maybe it's just that I'm a media student, but, come on.
Nielsen ranking?
Sure. So I don't want to assume that most people have heard of the Nielsen ratings, but
Yes, they have. And the judge is making out his grocery list now. We need hamburger rolls, and I think we're out of relish.
anyone who's involved with selling advertising or the news media knows that Nielsen for more than 50 years has measured the top 200 designated market areas. New York City is number one. It's the largest DMA. The media in that market reaches the most people. And so it's a measure of how many active news consumers, is the way I would describe it, are in a city or a city's area. I know we're looking at counties, but your designated market area here in Latah County fall under the radius, I think I mentioned earlier, Spokane, Washington. In Ada County, their designated market area is Boise, Idaho. A different deal.
And what's the Nielsen ranking of Latah County?
It's ranked 64 out
And
of 210,
and what is Boise?
97.
I have nothing. So I should follow up and say, in terms of how that's measured, 64 mean that is a higher rank than Boise at 97.
The DMA in which Latah County resides has far more opportunities for media stories to be seen based on the strength of the DMA. As you get down to the smaller DMAs, for example, Glendive, Montana, has historically been market 210 last. They have one CBS affiliate. There's just not a lot of news coming out of that.
Nobody watches CBS. I mean, if you look at the Nielsen ratings, which are a gold standard, nobody wants it's way down.
An area, a DMA like Glendive. But on the two counties you're talking about, they reside in a DMA that's 64 for Latah County. A larger DMA is going to have more media opportunities to be seen and more media outlets available. As you get to smaller markets, you have fewer and fewer media outlets serving there.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beatty.
Nothing for the state, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, may this witness be excused.
He can, Your Honor, and the exhibits that are with him can go for you for the court's paper file for the record.
Thank you. Okay, sir, you're free to leave or you're free to stay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Being here. Thank you. Thank you.
So an hour and a half for the first witness. Next, come on, let's go. Next. I've actually had judges say that to me. Move it along, counselor. Let's move it along.
They're very small letters.
I agree, Your Honor. It was really hard to get them on one page. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
This judge has a lot to say.
Why don't we take a quick break? And maybe come back at 10:20. Okay?
10:20. Oh yeah, we're behind because I've been stopping it a little bit. So we're behind.
Oh, wait, are they?
So what's happening now is that we were delayed a little bit because I did stop it and start it a few times to comment, and they're apparently still on a break, but they're due back any minute. They're due back any time. Let me just check and make sure that that's correct. Let me just double check something. Did you have any comments, Red? I cut you off there a minute ago. What did you say?
I just forgot that they were on a different time. Though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, first of all, they're 3 hours behind us, so they're on Pacific time. So let's see what's going on. Yeah, they're still on their break. They are still on their break. They were supposed to be on a break until 10:20, which is, oh, it looks like they're coming back. Okay, it looks like they're coming back. Let's see if we can get back here. Yes. Okay. We're back. There's Ann Taylor, Chief Defense Attorney.
And then please state your name. Like,
We
didn't miss anything. Here's the next witness.
Her name's Amani Elalili. Last name is EL-ALAYLI.
thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning. I can see you brought some papers to the witness stand with you today. Will you identify what those are?
Yeah, it's just copies of the slides. Nothing. None of my piece I couldn't see.
Okay.
She's a psychologist. We've talked about her in previous episodes.
Presentation that you for us to share today?
It's
okay. At this time, will you place that document in front of you face down? And if you have difficulty seeing the slides, let me know and we'll have you turn it over so you can track and help us understand what you're going to teach us today. Okay? Sure.
Yeah, I want to make sure then the state has stipulated to admit that.
That's correct.
Slides. Okay, thank you. So all the slides that we might be considering today, you agree to.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Will you tell us what you do for work?
I'm a professor at Eastern Washington University.
What do you teach?
I teach social psychology, which is the study of how people interact with each other and influence each other, how we're all affected by social situations.
I'm going to ask you some questions so that I can understand your background that led to your ability to teach. But I want to know if you're here today in your capacity as a professor or in your separate role as an expert consultant.
And here's my separate role as a consultant. So what I'll be talking about today is based on my expert opinion, based on the research I've conducted and what I've learned about in the field, and they're not affiliated with the university.
Thank you for that. Now let's go to your education. What degrees do you hold?
So I have a bachelor's in psychology, and I have a
Yeah, every time there's an expert witness, you have to qualify them and talk about their education, training, and experience. Those three things have to be gone into it. Can be tedious.
like I mentioned,
It can be tedious to be certain, and they've in advance, according to the court rules, they've had to provide her curriculum vitae, which is just a fancy word for a resume for a professional person at a pretty high level. And so she's submitted all that to the court. And a lot of times in some trials, and again, this isn't a trial, this is a hearing, but in a lot of trials, you can stipulate to the experts' qualifications, especially as here in a hearing. In a jury trial, you don't want to do that. You want the jury to hear about the person's education, training, and experience. But in a hearing like this, it's just, in my view, a waste of time.
2002.
2002 at University of Florida, 2003 at Eastern Washington University.
In your role as a professor and a professional, have you written articles and been published?
I have
How many, roughly?
roughly 15, give or take.
Do any of those relate to human bias?
Yes, most of them. So a lot of them are focused centrally on bias, and then many of the others are tangentially related to bias. So it could be biased perceptions of ourselves, how we tend to overestimate ourselves in a lot of ways. It includes biased impressions of individuals, like you might take one thing about a person and make a whole bunch of conclusions about them when you don't know them. And that could influence how you perceive their behavior later on. It includes biased perceptions of groups, so stereotyping and prejudice. And I've also studied biased impressions of businesses.
Have you consulted as an expert in other cases besides Mr. Kohberger's case?
Yes, I consulted in a case around 2016 or so, and then I was involved in the non-dissemination hearing here as well for Mr. Kohberger's case.
So you're telling us that you testified before Mr. Kohberger's case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And have you testified as an expert in any other hearings besides that one, Mr. Kohberger?
I mean, the judge knows all this. And so again, I mean, when we're at a hearing in front of a judge, not a jury, the judge knows all this. It just seems like this whole hearing, which we're going to be here all day, folks, could have been truncated by, especially in that the state has stipulated to the admission to the exhibits.
What is your role today? What did we hire you to do and ask you to do?
So my role was to evaluate how publicity about a case could shape potential jurors when they come in and sit on a panel, and to see if maybe people who were living in Lake County or have some connection to Lake County might potentially have more problems being objective because of media saturation and other issues.
Did you prepare a PowerPoint to help walk through what you have to share today?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to do my best.
Oh boy, another PowerPoint. That's not us giving you a black screen, folks. There it is. There it is. There's the PowerPoint. Oh boy, we have another PowerPoint. Couldn't you put some color into this?
Pretty bland PowerPoint.
Yeah, I mean, Red, we've done PowerPoints, so we usually put some color into them and like some illustrations.
I am trying to find the right.
You just go to slideshow, right to the top, maybe 6 down to the right. One more, right. And then on the left, towards its front beginning.
Okay. I think we're there. Thank you for helping me through that.
Do this regularly. teaching.
All right. I want to know if this is the background of the research on potential juror bias. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research on how publicity affects potential jurors. It says roughly 40 years. Really, it's been longer because in the 1960s, there were some high profile cases. And so social scientists wondered, does it matter if there's a lot of publicity about a case? Could that potentially make jurors less objective? Could that influence actual outcomes in a case? And so the research started then, kind of trickled in, and then became more and more popular. And then in 1999, there were enough studies that somebody conducted what's called a meta-analysis. And another one was conducted in 2022. So it's nice to have a recent one. A meta-analysis is when you take a bunch of studies on the same topic and you statistically combine them into one giant study. So they do this in every field. They do this in medicine, every discipline, where you really want to know an overall effect of something. Because I might run a study on the effects of pretrial publicity and find maybe a small effect, and somebody else might find a big effect, and somebody else might find no effect. And
Can I condense this all down? When there's a lot of pretrial publicity, people tend to engage in biased thinking.
I don't want just one study that tells me it works or doesn't work if I have a serious illness or the medication has serious risks. But I would be much more confident if there were a whole bunch of studies, dozens of studies combined, and thousands of participants' data. And so a meta-analysis basically does that. It narrows down a specific topic, in this case, the effects of pretrial publicity on judgments, and it examines overall, combined, is there an effect? And so there were, like I said, one is quite recent from 2022. So it's the simplest way to describe this research. It's the easiest way for somebody to know where it stands, even if they don't read all the articles. And what this work has found is that if somebody's exposed to publicity about a case, something about the defendant, something about the case, fact, fiction, that the tendency is, if you look at everything as a whole, for it to affect judgments, and specifically how much you like the defendant, your inclination to say that they're guilty, your judgments of their criminality, etc. And this has been shown with individual judgments of guilt, but even more so with group judgments, with juries. And it looks at participants who are randomly assigned to get pretrial publicity information or not, so that you can really determine cause effect. So this would be a formal experiment. We do lots of studies, and experiments are the ones that I like to look at, because what you do is you hold everything constant except for one thing that you change. You get one people, one experience, another group of people, another experience, and then expose them to all the same things. So all the same trial stimulus materials. And you see, okay, the people who got some information ahead of time that they weren't supposed to pay attention to, did they evaluate the evidence differently?
Yeah, Karen, I agree with your comment. Karen Cheney just commented a minute ago, I really don't think that they needed as many experts as they have to prove this point. And I would agree 100%. I mean, that's what I said kind of before. I don't know if you were here when I said it, that there are two ways to present information to a court. And one is arguing it on the pleadings, and the other is through evidentiary hearing, and that's what this is. They're going way deep into the weeds, and it would have seemed to me that in that they have already submitted their expert reports, and in that the prosecutors for the state of Idaho have already stipulated the admission of the experts. It would seem to me they could jump to the conclusion and say, there has been a lot of pretrial publicity in the Kohberger case, and yes, it has had a effect on people's thinking. People have confirmation bias. People have built up bias. So this means that we should probably go to an area where there are more potential jurors, where we can get away from the small potential jury veneer and have a greater number of people and have a greater ability to impanel an unbiased jury. But so, Karen, I agree with you.
Is there like a rule against dragging out, or like a general, maybe an unspoken rule It's like, you know, you don't want to get the jury to just stop listening or maybe fall asleep.
There's no real jury. There's no rule. And again, there's no jury here. This is just to the judge. So there's no jury. But no, to answer your question, it's really up to the discretion of the judge. There is a rule called the 100 bishops rule, or the cumulative evidence rule. In other words, you can't, submit the same evidence over and over again, or the same information from 100 bishops or multiple people saying the same thing. But no, there's no real rule, and it's really up to the discretion of the court. I've had judges when I was going pretty deep into the weeds in some information. In one case I'm thinking about, it was a billing issue between a physician and his billing company. We got very deep into the weeds of billing codes and updating bills and whether they're ripe or not. And we got really deep into it. And after we were about 2 days into it, the judge just said, "Counselor, move it along. Counselor, move it along. Counselor, move it along." So a judge has the ability to do that. A judge can, it's at their discretion. It is at their discretion to do that.
And we don't take it a step further.
Did that answer your question?
Then
There's no real rules.
people get arrested all the time and it turns out they didn't commit a crime, or wait a minute, we all have knives in our homes, but we haven't all killed somebody. I have a lot of knives in my kitchen. A lot of households have guns. And so
What is this proving, that there are a lot of knives in the kitchen, but you don't kill people? Of course. No, really?
It sounds like you're telling me that we're just absorbing information, and in Mr. Kohberger's case, from the media, people may take bits and pieces, and that starts to create a level of knowledge or human bias.
we might feel like we know about something more than we do. Yeah.
Are there other ways that bias gets created?
Yes. And it looks like you advance to the next slide. So one thing that's relevant here too is listening to authority figures. So I mentioned that we're processing superficially a lot of the time, peripherally, and one readily available peripheral cue a lot of the time when it comes to this type of situation is hearing information from authority figures, people who have status or expertise, any kind of power. And we tend to listen more to people in those positions. And yes,
I would have to totally disagree with her. I mean, maybe 50 years ago that was true, that people listened to authority figures, but I think that's changed, don't
Well,
you?
there's like so many different kinds of authority.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, there's like social authority, and then there's like actual authority. Like somebody could have a higher, status than you.
Yeah, I think 50, 60, 70 years ago, not that I remember that much from then. I think 50, 60, 70 years ago in a different America, authority figures carried a great weight. But through what this country has been through in the last 50, 60 years, I don't think authority figures really carry that much weight. And all you really have to do is to go on any social media or streaming service or Facebook to realize that and I don't want to get into politics. We're not going to get into politics. But when people in Washington or Boston who just give themselves a great air of authority speak, people go, yeah, really?
But let's be real though. Like, are you trusting that .com source or the .gov?
Well, I'm not trusting. My point was that I disagree with what she's saying, that authorities have a great deal of influence. I don't agree with that point. Do you agree or not?
I do.
You agree?
I mean, they got authority for a reason.
I'm sorry?
Said authorities, like, I don't know.
I don't know either. I
just really do think it does. Maybe that's just like English for brainwashing me then.
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think that authority figures carry the weight that they did many, many, many years ago.
The chief of the police at the time had said that he was certain that he arrested the right suspect and he didn't have any doubts. And so the community would say, okay, well, the chief of police is sure, so then I can be sure too. But like I said, we can't assume.
I mean, I don't want to change the subject, but look at what the Karen Reed case and the Sandra Birchmore case have done. Do you really think that the police in that part of the country are really going to be those authority figures are really going to carry the weight of authority in the future?
Wait, what? I'm sorry.
All right, that's okay. You were zoning out, no problem.
Does that Is that something that creates more bias in the minds of the Lake Tahoe County residents that heard that?
Yeah, I mean, they're familiar with him. They know him to be an authority figure. They may know him personally or trust him personally. And so, yeah, somebody outside of Lake Tahoe County, they'll still be affected by his authority status, but maybe not as much, right? And then he also has power over people in that community, and that seems to carry some weight when it comes to this type of influence. And then also, the president of University of Idaho saying, we feel safe now, they found the person. It sounds very conclusive when there hadn't been a trial yet. And so another authority figure is pretty major in an area like Lake Tahoe because so much is centered around the university.
Are there other ways that you found that create bias?
Yes, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. This is the phenomenon that goes back maybe a century. We've been studying this in so many different contexts, tons and tons of research on this phenomenon called classical conditioning. And it's basically when we make associations between things and it causes us to have reactions that we didn't have before. Like, for example, if your alarm clock, we don't really have alarm clocks that much anymore, but if your alarm sound on your phone, if that's what you use, wakes you up this morning and you have kind of a negative response to it, it might be because you associated it with waking up before you wanted to. Before, I know I always try to choose a sound that I don't have an aversion to, but then it doesn't take long before now I have a negative reaction. So you make this connection, right? But if that same tone was used.
My dog wakes me up in the morning by barking, but I don't have a negative response to my dog. I like my dog.
Okay. So classical conditioning is when we develop a response to a stimulus. It could be a sound, it could be any stimulus at all, including a person, because we've connected them with something that it has been paired with, especially repeated pairings. So in this particular case.
Wait a minute, what'd you say?
I get it. So I started waking up to A Ladies by Travis Porter every morning, and I hated the song after. And I never thought that I would get to
Oh, I get it. So you had a negative connotation to this song that woke you up every morning.
Exactly.
Did you like the song before?
Yeah, that's why I woke up to it.
Oh, that's interesting. Now look at Tina B. Tina B is commenting, not trying to be political, but we just went through a couple of years of people absolutely doing what authority figures told them to do. Did they, Tina? Because a lot of people had a lot of questions about whether we were being misled. And there's actually a lot of evidence that we were misled during the whole COVID thing. I mean, yeah, you had to do something. Yeah, the CDC had to respond. Yeah, we had to take some measures to fight COVID. I mean, I got COVID, but I'm fine. Not kind of. But there, Tina, thank you for being one of our great viewers today. But I would say, I don't know, is that really true? Because a lot of people really questioned how far they went, the alleged authority figures, in telling us what to do. I mean, why is it that the big box stores, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, the Lowe's were all allowed to open, but the little mom and pop places all had to close? It just, so I think a lot of people did question authority.
Well, I feel like we have just a little bit of, just set trust for people who have the most authority, because you kind of need to, or else your quality of life would be kind of poor. You just kind of be scared all the time.
I don't know. I'm surprised to hear you say that, because I don't know. I think you're a little bit of a rebel. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I'm not saying that the government doesn't suck. I'm just saying that we might kind of, have this mindset of well, they got to care at least a little bit, or else, our life would suck,
And, I don't know. Again, I don't want to be political either, but I mean, you see these candidates up on the national stage just trashing each other personally. And that's got to, where we have this great country that stands for great things and has a lot of power in the world, and people that are either in power or want to be in power just trash each other, with no thought of, keeping an air of authority or keeping an air of professionalism or keeping an air of, being, above the fray. They just trash each other, that not realizing that they're really hurting themselves, the institution, and the other person. I don't know. Let's get back to the hearing and see if they've gotten anywhere. Uh-oh.
If the defendant's name is seen throughout media and social media a lot, or his image is shown alongside things that are aversive, negative words, things like terror, murder, evil, or alongside known killers, alongside details of the murder, alongside information about, tragic consequences, things that make us feel bad.
Yeah, it's called negative association, like Red's song that wakes her up that she doesn't like anymore. It's just called a negative association. I mean, do we need 14 slides to prove that point?
What happens is it doesn't take that many pairings, and then his name alone, which was once neutral, because most people wouldn't have known him, becomes conditioned, and it evokes those same kinds of feelings. And they've done studies like this where they can make this happen within minutes. If I could take a picture of any of you or multiple pictures of any of you, show those interspersed with pictures of other people, and at the same time present words, consciously or not consciously, that say things like terror and evil. And at the end of the study, I can ask people, what do you think of this person? And the rating will be lower. And so if you get that exposure a lot, like in Laytown, where people are getting a lot of media exposure and also social media exposure and having a lot of discussions and attending, vigils, and they're really being exposed to kind of all these emotional reactions. If they're thinking about him at the same time, they can't help but make that connection, even if they don't think he's guilty.
Let me make sure I understand how big this is, how far reaching this is. We've been with this case pending for a year and a half, and there's been, suffice to say, a lot of media coverage. There's a lot of pictures of Mr. Kohberger in the media. Do you mean that when we walk into trial and the room's full of potential jurors, there's going to be a great majority of them that before we sit down are going to have a feeling of bias against Mr. Kohberger?
Yeah, I do. And you've seen the pictures.
I'll take that question. Yes.
Why
These
did
ominous.
she say it like she was in trouble? Like, why did her tone of voice really sound like she was like admitting something horrible? I mean, it is pretty horrible, but it's not like the psychologist's fault. I don't know.
I think it was a leading question that the other side didn't object to, because they're sitting on the other side going, oh my God, why is this going on so long? I mean, she was pretty much leading the witness. I mean, we all know what the answer was going to be, and yeah, that's kind of the point of the whole thing. That's kind of the point of the whole thing. That's like there used to be a rule against asking the ultimate question: did he do it? But I guess it's important to get that point in. I mean, yes, of course, in a case like this that's been on radio, TV, YouTube, everywhere else, there's going to be a million people that have heard about it, and there's going to be that negative association. They've just seen Mr. Kohberger's picture, and they make the negative association. Now he did it. So, the process, Bill Thompson is going to say, Your Honor, you're a great judge, and you know how to do a voir dire, and in the process, you will weed out those people that have those negative associations. And you, Mr. Judge, being the great judge that you are, you will be able to ferret all of that out. There, I just made the argument. Can we move on?
Headlines, that connection can't help but be made.
This all the way that bias gets created, or do you have another one?
I have one more.
One more.
First things that happen largely while the publicity is coming in and you're getting exposed to it. And it's sort of a category of a lot of different influences that are emotional and motivational. And this one, I think, is especially relevant to, sourcing people out of Laytown County to be jurors. So the media played a role in inducing some emotions like it does. It likes to attract attention, things like fear and anger and sympathy and empathy. But in that community, people are going to have those emotions anyway from everything that's going on. But if the media uses phrases like killer on the loose, everybody stay vigilant, make sure you report all suspicious activity, then they're arousing that even more. And so what happens is when we have emotions like that, they filter in how we process information. Just like when you're angry, you're more likely to remember things that have made you angry in the past than things that have made you happy. And when you're angry, you're also more likely to have kind of an agenda with new information coming in. And so, for example, and this is something that could stay with somebody, this distorted information processing could stay with somebody and could get, there could be a resurgence during a trial where it keeps affecting somebody as they are reminded of.
What were you going to say there, Red?
I just said, like, that's so weird. She just taught me something. I didn't know that, like, when you're feeling a certain emotion, you can recall feeling that emotion more than other emotions.
It's interesting. You never felt like when you're having an argument with somebody that's mad at you that they remember things that they were mad at you for
Their
about,
emotion.
and they build up a list. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that it totally makes sense now.
Yeah.
But like a glass wall just shattered, you know?
Yeah, or if you're happy, if you're with a friend and having a good time, don't you remember all the other good times you've had with that friend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they've associated moods with different judgments of guilt. Like, for example, if you're angrier, you tend to be more punitive and you want retribution. And in fact, in one study, they associated anger of mock jurors during a trial with support for imposing a death sentence for somebody. And they, when they were angry, they were less likely to pay attention to defense arguments. So people aren't trying to be biased. It's just that when we're in moods, those moods filter how we process information, how we take it in. And, I think I may have mentioned this already, but there's also kind of an emotional, motivational component to feel like the person who committed the crime is under arrest. It is the right person. I think I mentioned it as, being a motivation by the police, but the community has this motivation too in Latah, because they were living in fear during all these weeks where they were trying to find somebody to arrest. And somebody was arrested and people could take a sigh of relief. But that sigh of relief assumes that he's guilty. And so we have this coping mechanism, basically, where we want to get rid of these negative emotions. And one way to do that is to feel like, oh, well, if he committed a crime and he's under arrest, then I can feel safe now. And so that's something that could come into play too if you live within the region where the event occurred.
And that's because of the fear that was associated with
any of the emotions really could potentially distort information processing. That last point relevant to fear, but a lot of research on how anger influences judgments and how sympathy for victims, empathy for victims influences judgments. And certainly if you are in Latah and have attended vigils or offered social support, that you're really getting a lot of that empathy and sympathy as well, or if you're exposed to the personal media stories about what happened.
I just wonder, of our viewers that we have left, thank you very much for sticking with us. I appreciate it. I want you to tell me, go into the private chat and tell us, do you think that this presentation is effective? I mean, the issue is there's so much bias in Latah County, and is the potential jury pool so small that you have to move it somewhere else, that you have to change the venue to another area where either A, there's a little bit less bias, but B, given that there is bias, there's a larger jury pool, and you've got to, have that larger jury pool to increase the chances of getting a fair jury. I'm just asking our viewers to tell me, do you think that this presentation is effective, or should they have tried something else?
I feel like a lot of glass walls are shattering for me. I feel if the judge doesn't take this, I don't know how they're gonna prove to like move it to a different location.
What are you saying? Are you saying that this is an effective presentation?
No, yeah, it's really effective.
Okay.
I like it.
Okay.
Good call.
So I think I understand the ways that the human bias just gets bigger and more solid in a person. What happens if we seat a Latah County jury and those biases aren't there? What happens as we put on the trial and
This is the issue.
evidence is presented?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this one can get carried through the trial, this idea of motivational and emotional sources. But there are other things that can happen during trial too that kind of exacerbate the problem. And one of these is confirmation bias. So this has to do with us wanting to confirm our expectations of things. And one of the most fundamental human needs we have is a need for predictability. You don't want to walk into this courtroom and feel like you have no idea what's going to happen. That's uncomfortable. We want to feel like we know what's going to happen. And we know how people are going to behave. And so part of this need for predictability is that it causes us to distort reality a little bit. And so in one way that this does this is through the confirmation bias, which is once we develop an expectation of something, once we decide that this is true, this is the case, or the defendant is guilty or not guilty, or the defendant lives a certain lifestyle or behaves a certain way, or has, then once we decide something, everything goes through that filter. When I talked about an emotional filter, this is a cognitive filter, that we actually process information differently based on what we expect to see and hear. It's just like if, you're going to meet up with a friend and you think somebody called your name, you expected it. And so it made you hear it even when it didn't happen. And if somebody
that's a
does
really
call
good
your
point.
name, you hear it more readily. So we're kind of tuned in.
Okay, that's a really good point. We're not going to miss anything. I just stopped it temporarily to look at our poll, and Karen and Joanne both disagree with me. And Red, I'm 1-3. Karen says, I do think it's an effective presentation. Okay. And Joanne also says, I think it's appropriate, but maybe a little drawn out. So Joanne kind of agrees with me. And I guess it's effective. It's drawn out. Let's go back.
And so the processes I mentioned here, this filtering can happen via 3 different processes. One is selective attention. So if I'm a juror and I have expectations about Mr. Kohberger, it doesn't have to be just that he's guilty, but
What were you going to say?
Most of the things that I'm saying are probably just useless, but I can think of something now.
Never say that. Then people will tune out. Always say, I have a really important point.
Well, oh, I forgot it.
Well, I was going to say that I feel like I'm in college psychology class.
Oh yeah, no, I'm learning a lot from this. I was just gonna say that.
I feel like I'm in a college psychology class, which is appropriate because she is a professor of psychology at Eastern Idaho College. And so, but I just, I'm waiting for I'm like looking at the clock, waiting for the bell to ring so I can, go outside and eat some Doritos.
Yeah, this lady's like telling all the things that I like actually care about. I don't know.
No, it's a very good presentation, but I agree with Joanne. It's drawn out. It's a very good presentation. I shouldn't make light of it. But I go back to what I said earlier in this episode, and that is that I think it's excessive.
it could be expectations about him as a person. If I have expectations coming in and I'm getting all this new evidence during trial, going through that filter and paying attention to information that backs up my idea. Well, I had this idea that he's a bad guy, and this information backs that up. So I pay extra attention to that. And then they talked about something where he was kind to someone, and I really have to pay much attention to it. So we have this filter, and then we process information too in a distorted manner. We actually will change the information to fit in with what we think. It's just a way of our minds simplifying our worlds. And while these processes all help us not be overloaded cognitively, they distort what we take in. So we have to be
Yeah, Tina, and who likes going to the dentist, huh?
aware of that. And recall is distorted as well. So, trial takes place over a long.
What did you say?
Are we all just clinically insane? What does she mean? We can just distort the things we hear to fit what we think.
I don't know if it's distortion so much as confirmation bias really means that most of us, me accepted, most people have a view of the world. You see the world in one way or another way. And when information is given to you, especially these days when information is like a fire hydrant, there's just so much information that's thrown at all of us that you tend to selectively take it in. And things that prove my point, I'm going to take in. Things that prove your point, Red, you're going to take in. And at the end of the day, if we discuss the same stuff, you're going to see it one way and I'm going to see it another way. That's just confirmation bias.
I feel like the older you get, the more that's true. But I feel like as a teenager, you're kind of just whatever tells you, you're sure, whatever, I feel like I might be a little bit too trusting.
Really? That's interesting. So it's a generational thing. That's interesting. Joanne says, I know that as I am roughly 80 miles away and raised in a small town, much smaller than Moscow, I really think that they will not be able to find a fair jury. People talk. Well, yeah, I agree with that entirely. I agree with what Joanne's saying, don't you?
Yeah. She's got a lot of good points.
I don't know why. Yeah, thank you, Joanne. I don't know why they have to go to this extent. As we pointed out in an episode that we did about a week before this, 3 trials in Idaho did have a change of venue without all of this. without all of this. The attorney that we had on, Kevin, pointed out that there were others that a venue change was allowed without this extent of 5 experts. And now this hearing is we've been going on for 2 hours, and the Daybell and Vallow trials saw venue changes without all of this. So I don't know. Thanks, Joanne.
Long period of time, potentially. And somebody has to remember a lot of information. And if they have distorted recall that's consistent with their expectations before coming in, that's obviously problematic.
Is that the only thing that happens when we have new information at trial?
No, I have a couple other things that I'd like to talk about. And the first one is belief perseverance, which is really a direct consequence of the confirmation bias. So it's just like it sounds. This is the tendency for our beliefs to persevere, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias supplies us with this filter. And because we have this filter, if somebody gives us all these facts that go against what we think, logically, we should just change our minds. A lot of the time we don't. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that sometimes we even cling more closely to our beliefs. And anyone who's looked at anything on social media has probably seen evidence of this, where somebody has a strong belief about something and then somebody provides actual facts that contradict it. And then instead of saying, oh, you're right, I see your point. Of course, that can happen.
There's Karen says the same thing. Karen says, right, effective, but not necessary.
Sometimes
Everybody
What?
needs to learn how to start thinking like a freak, because if you literally just start shutting people down because you already think something, I feel like you're just going to embarrass yourself a lot. Like, a lot of the times, like, a belief, like, you can find a lot of information to support it, but, like, then there's, like, just this one fact that will shut you down immediately. Like, what are you even going to say to it? And, like, if you know you're wrong, why would you want to do that to yourself?
Well, the fact, you're right, but the unfortunate reality is this is how people are. You're saying it's wrong, and I agree with you. It's wrong, but it's how people are. People have these belief perseverances. They come in knowing, well, I know he's guilty. He had that orange suit on, and I saw them doing the perp walk into court, so I know he's guilty, and I don't need to hear the evidence. And nobody's going to actually say that in those words, but I think that that's how a lot of people think, and it's unnecessary that we go to this extent to say all these things, but I agree.
The general tendency is for people to still stick with their beliefs anyway because they formed them. When you're in the process of forming your beliefs, that's different. But once you've formed something, it tends to stick. It's the same thing with stereotypes. Somebody has an assumption that elderly people are bad drivers, and they see a whole bunch of evidence suggesting otherwise, and even research studies and things like that. Then they no, I still think elderly people are bad drivers. So that's belief perseverance. And in some cases, people will even double down. Again, social media, they might even get more aggressively in line with their initial opinion after seeing evidence to the contrary. So this is one reason it's directly aligned with the confirmation bias.
It sounds like they can work together when somebody already has a bias. They've already made decisions about.
Yeah, really any expectation or decision or judgment, even if you don't know that you have it. I heard the phrase of growing legs. Well, there's a famous social influence researcher who used that same phrase with decision making. Like once you've decided something, your decision grows legs of its own. And so now it's not just the normal information necessary that for any rational person, because we all kind of have this tendency to be irrational in situations like this. But it ends up causing us to distort reality a little bit and need a lot more evidence now than we should to change our minds.
What else impacts getting new information in the course of the trial?
We'll advance to the next slide. I want to mention a little bit about cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is an uncomfortable feeling we have when we have like an inner clash, like an inner hypocrisy, like if I'm religious, but I don't adhere to one thing about my religion, and then there's this inner clash. And we don't like that feeling, and we like to reduce it, minimize it, prevent it. So why is that relevant here? Well, if somebody lives in Lake County, they might have a dissonance experience, because if they start during trial to believe that, oh, maybe the defendant is innocent, maybe he shouldn't be convicted, that belief might be battling another belief about loyalty to their community, because they know the community wants closure. They know that the community wants him to be guilty. They know the community wants to feel safe. And so they have this inner clash. And what happens when we have this inner clash, lots of things can happen. But one thing that could happen is we could distort reality. That's another reason for kind of being a little bit less accurate when taking in information. So if I'm if I'm a juror from Lake County, and I'm starting to kind of think, oh, maybe he didn't do it. There might be part of my brain convincing me that no, he's guilty because of this inner clash. I want to get rid of the clash.
Is that because of the loyalty a person would feel to Lake County, to their community?
I think that's a big part of it. And there could be other reasons with regard to community connections that could create that clash too.
So when are we going to get to the mob mentality? I think that's where she's going with this, that, oh my gosh, I've got to be true to my community. Otherwise, if we find the guy not guilty, they're going to, come get us all and burn down the courthouse. I mean, is that where she's going with this?
Quitted somebody, for example, and having to face people in your community, which is something I touch on later a little bit too.
Wait, can I say something?
All right.
real quick?
Should we move forward?
What'd you say?
I was gonna say, I feel like the college, the people who speak from the college, they really play into that fear a lot. I feel like they try, I don't want to say even play into the fear more, the people will judge you if you have a different opinion than them fear, I mean, you can just listen to them speak. And you'll get my point.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, when they're going to take a break. I wonder if the judge is falling asleep.
If you look at the research, which there are limitations to these. And so one of them, of course, is juror selection. Let's try to find people, for example, who haven't been exposed to publicity. So there are problems with that. Can you recount all of the
Do you want somebody that hasn't been exposed to publicity? I mean, don't you want somebody that their mind is open and they're always taking in new stuff, and they, my generation read the newspaper, your generation, they Google stuff and learn. Don't you want somebody that has an inquisitive mind? Do you want somebody that lives in a cave and never, reads a newspaper or takes in news?
Right.
That's ridiculous in my view.
It's also a huge ask,
What do you mean?
It's a huge ask to find somebody who has never heard about this, or I don't know, just lives under a rock, like you said. Everybody has.
Well, especially in that area. I mean, especially in that area in Moscow, Idaho, or Lincoln, anywhere in Idaho or Washington State. To find somebody that's never heard of this case, that's crazy. And you're going to find somebody that lives under a rock, and you don't want them on the jury. I wouldn't want them on my jury.
Yeah, because then they're just going to listen to whatever you're telling them.
Either that, or they just, how do I say this in words that are acceptable to say anywhere, especially on YouTube? How do I say this? Do you want somebody that just lives under a rock or in a cave and just doesn't care about what's going on in the outside world, and they just sit in mommy's basement and smoke dope and do nothing? No, I don't want them on the jury. I want somebody that thinks.
Publicity that you've been exposed to? No. If I asked you to tell me about all of the interactions you had with people over the course of a week, you're going to have forgotten some, right? But doesn't mean they're not going to be affecting you. So maybe when I was at the grocery store, the person checking me out had a negative expression on their face, and I didn't.
My apologies to all people that live in mommy's basement and smoke dope. I've been rewatching the Netflix series, that 90s show. Did you ever watch that?
No.
It's about these kids that spend great portions of their lives in mommy's basement smoking dope. No, I don't. It's a funny show, but I wouldn't want any of them on a jury.
Yeah, no.
And hearing all of this evidence, something might remind me, oh yeah, and I remember they found this information, and maybe it's something that's not admissible, but now it's affecting me. And I didn't report that I knew that because I didn't remember that I knew it until something cued that up. And so that's a retrieval cue, is basically something that reminds you of what you know and can't articulate yet, or maybe don't have knowledge about it at a conscious level. And so there's a problem with that, picking people who haven't been as exposed to a case. And of course, in LATA, we talked about the saturation of media. It'd be hard to find somebody to even say that, but if they say that.
I want to ask our people that are with us, our viewers, are you still paying attention to this, or are you making dinner? Are you knitting? Are you reading? Are you making popcorn? Or are you really following this? I mean, it is interesting. And one level of me says this is fascinating stuff, but the other level of me says it's a little much. I get the point, and I agree with the point, by the way. But I want to know from all of our viewers, are you paying attention to all this and taking it all in, or are you doing something else, like, I don't know, making dinner?
I don't know if that really would be something we could rely on as being totally correct. And then this is something I focus a lot of my research on, and it's bias. So there's a lot of research on how we overestimate ourselves. We have overconfidence. We tend to rate ourselves as better than average in intelligence. There's one study where the vast majority of people rated themselves as better than average drivers, but we can't all be better than average. And it included people who had gotten into multiple car accidents. So while people might be thinking that they're making an accurate assessment of themselves, when they're asked, hey, do you have any bias, for or against the defendant? Do you have any, or are you capable of setting aside your bias? People probably often believe that they can set that bias aside because it's in line with all of this research that we know about how we tend to overestimate ourselves. So they're going to say they're less biased than they are. That's been shown over and over again in a lot of settings. And by the way, the people who are the most biased have the most distortion when they're estimating their bias in at least some cases that they've studied so far. That's some research I've done too. And then also they're going to be biased about how much bias they have. That's called the bias blind spot, which has been studied too. So I might acknowledge that other people might be biased, but I won't be biased, and I'll be capable of setting it aside. So that's one process, jury selection that we would hope would work, but there are a lot of drawbacks to it. So I wouldn't rely on that.
Do you think that it's less likely to work in a situation like this with the amount of negative media coverage that has been going on for a long time?
Yeah, if you ask somebody from Latah County to forget everything that they've heard about the case, forget all the discussions they've had, forget all of the media they've been exposed to, forget all the emotions that they've experienced, set all that aside. Can you really do that? Can you unfear things and unfeel things for an extended period of time to be objective? That's quite an undertaking. So yeah, I think that's problematic.
You mentioned extended period of time. This trial is projected to take 3 full months. Is that what you mean by extended period of time?
Yeah, really. The longer it is, the more potentially distortion there can be because your decision has grown legs and things are getting filtered through filters. And then emotional things can carry a little bit more longevity. So I wouldn't expect it to just go away if it's a long trial by any means, but I'd expect to see it in a short or long.
Is there anything else that can be attempted that might or might not work?
Yeah, my next slide is on instructions. And of course, people would want to try to give instructions to jurors to be unbiased. And like I said, people overestimate their ability to do this. They don't even think they're that biased to begin with. And the first step to not being influenced by bias is to acknowledge that you have bias. So there's already an obstacle there. And then you have to have the motivation to not be biased. And I hope jurors have that. You also have to have the cognitive capacity to be unbiased. And that's where we run into a lot of problems because their cognitive capacity is going to be occupied by serving as a juror, paying attention to information. They don't have time to spend 80% of their mind, trying not to be biased and catching all the bias. And in fact, there's research that suggests that when we try to suppress thoughts, that we can think about them even more as soon as we let our guard down, which is very soon, because you have to think about other things at some point. So if I try not to think about something like an argument I had with somebody, or somebody tries not to think about cigarettes, but they're trying to quit smoking, they could do that for a really short amount of time. But as soon as they think about something else, their mind gets flooded with those thoughts. Because in order for you to not think about something, you have to think about it so that you can catch those thoughts. And that process is automatic. Most of what I've been talking about today is unconscious, automatic processing, and that's why it's so hard to control. And with regard to instructions to disregard information, whether it's something that people learned pre-trial or something they learned during trial that turns out to be inadmissible, the research shows that those instructions typically don't work, and sometimes they can backfire. Partly.
I've always said this. It's quite common that a witness will answer a question. And then the other side will say, motion to strike. And the judge says, okay, motion to strike allowed. Jurors, you are to pay no attention to that. You're to strike. Yeah, right. You can't tell people to unring a bell. You can't tell people don't take that into consideration. I've always had a problem with that. So I agree 100%.
Wait. You guys don't like this psychology stuff? Because I feel like I'm getting a little bit of therapy right now.
No, I do like the psychology, as you put it, the psychology stuff. And I've always said that, when a witness will answer a question in a certain way, and the other side will say motion to strike, and the judge says you will disregard that comment. Well, if somebody says I saw the guy run the red light and hit the other car, disregard that. Nuh-uh.
Y'all didn't hear that.
So if people are reading material, I don't care whether it's in the newspaper or the TV or Reddit or wherever it is, and they come into the courthouse in Moscow, Idaho, and the judge says, disregard all that. No. No. So I agree 100% with this.
Because of this thought suppression rebound effect. And then there could be other reasons too, like people not wanting to be told how to think. And I mentioned too that, it applies to emotional information too. So factual and emotional pretrial publicity would still have influence, even if people say, don't let this affect you. I wouldn't assume that works at all.
No, it doesn't work at all. No,
fortunately.
No.
How about jury deliberation? Will that work if you have a juror in there who's going to maybe accidentally bring something in or interpret something based on something that heard before, or they've remembered something over the course of trial? Will the other jurors push it out, help them not to think about that? Will the group overcome that bias?
Yeah, so we would hope that you get a bunch of people together who are trying to be objective for them to sort of.
Okay, we have 3 comments we have to respond to. First, JB's. Wake up, will you? If we have to stay awake for this, you have to stay awake for this, okay? Donna says, I missed the beginning of the presentation, but did they discuss the benefits of moving the trial? Will the publicity be less in another area? Well, the second part of your question, will the publicity be less in another area? The first witness that you may or may not have missed, the guy from TrueScope Media, pointed out that the saturation of media in the Moscow area was so much greater than the publicity down in the Boise, Idaho area, Ada County. So, yes, the publicity to date has been less, not a lot less, but it has been less. The first part of your question, did they discuss the benefits of moving the trial? This is all kind of getting to that. That's what we call in the law the ultimate question. And they're kind of working that around the edges with all of this testimony. Then Tina B says, do all trials have pretrial hearings that are this extensive? Is this weird in the law world? This is a bit unusual. As we pointed out in an episode we did recently, you can go back and look. with attorney Kevin Curtis, who's an attorney in that area in Washington State and is very familiar with Moscow, Idaho. He pointed out that 4 trials, actually, 2 of them being the very well-known trials of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, the venue was moved without all of this. This is so the answer to your question. Yes, this is kind of excessive. This is excessive. This is over the top. Why is it over the top? A question that you didn't ask is because this is a big case. It's a major case. The judge himself has said he only wants to do this once. He wants to do it right. And my sense is that, and some of our commenters here and elsewhere have said, they feel that there's, and I don't know. I'm not a part of the legal culture in that area, so I do not know, but they feel that there's a sense of closeness between the judge and the prosecutor and that they're inclined against allowing for a change of venue. And so the defense is going overboard to argue for the change of venue, which, if not granted, will in fact be an issue for appeal.
Less motivation to find the defendant guilty. It doesn't affect them, their feelings of safety, the community. They don't have to worry about reporting back, and other people maybe ostracizing them if they didn't make the judgment that was expected or wanted. And so my recommendation would be to find a community to recruit jurors from that's as far removed from LATAW as possible, physically and psychologically.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for you, but if you hold on just a minute, I think Ms. Katie might.
So there you have it. That's the answer to that last question. She's saying because of the pervasive publicity and the psychology of people who are just going to have that confirmation bias and other factors that you talked about, you got to get the trial out of there. That's her argument.
In any jurisdiction where there's been a tremendous amount of pretrial publicity, at least some of these biases would apply to a prospective jury pool, correct?
Yeah.
And the best thing, if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, for this trial would be to have a jury pool with the largest percentage of jurors who hadn't formed an opinion on this case already. Would that be fair to say?
I mean, you need, I can't speak to percentages. You need somehow to find enough people to serve on the jury who have not been exposed. Now, this is a high profile case, so we know the exposure is all over the state, and of course this is part of it. But if you can have less exposure, you have less bias.
In a case like this, where there's been so much exposure across all counties, are there unique challenges in selecting a jury that would apply anywhere?
So, well, I mentioned some unique things about LATAW County and emotional investment in the community, concern for community members, and having felt that fear and wanting the defendant to be guilty so that they could resolve the fear and anger. So there are all those emotional and social connections, and of course, Dr. Edelman's report, which will come up later, shows that a lot of people who live in LATAW County are connected in some way to the university or the police involved in the case. So they actually, know people or they lived in LATAW County. And so those kinds of things make, because it's such a small community, make LATAW a unique experience.
And so you've reviewed Dr. Edelman's survey.
I have.
So does it sound correct that 75% of folks in LATAW County are not affiliated with the university?
I don't recall his percentages.
Okay.
So offhand, I would have to see the report. I could look at it if you'd like.
Okay. And I should be more precise. I believe the question was, are you or a family member a student or employee at the University of Idaho in Moscow? And the percentage of folks who responded no was 75%. Does that sound right?
I couldn't tell you without seeing it. Sorry, I don't remember.
Would it surprise you to find?
I thought I had read somewhere else that as many as 50% of the people in LATAW County have some association with the university, not necessarily employees, parents of students. I thought the number was a lot higher.
So is one strategy that the court could use in any jurisdiction, whether the trial stays in LATAW County or moves to Ada County, Would bringing in a larger jury pool alleviate some of these concerns across any jurisdiction?
Well, if we're talking about Latah County, you know, a lot of the things that I mentioned were not in the survey.
Look at the judge propping his head up with his hand. Am I the only person that thinks he's kind of, if not falling asleep, not really excited about all of this?
People think he's a bad guy, but they don't think he's guilty. And then that still could influence judgments. So it's really hard to answer that question without, you know, I didn't make the survey. And even if I did, there'd be a lot of things that I would miss too, you know, so I can't make that determination. About, you said maybe you can restate it and I can.
No, I appreciate the answer. Thank you. Now, I guess the last question I'll ask you is, would you be surprised to find out that in the survey, when jurors were asked, potential jurors who were responding to the survey were asked what their opinion is of Brian Kohberger, the highest percentage of prospective jurors that were surveyed who had no opinion of Mr. Kohberger were Latah County survey respondents? Would that surprise you?
That they have no opinion about whether he is guilty.
I think the question is just, do you have an opinion of Mr. Kohberger?
Well, it's a high profile case that had a lot of coverage and the percentages are so high that of people who have an opinion. I imagine, I don't have those in front of me, but in statistics, we call that a ceiling effect when all the percentages are high and you can't really see differences. So I don't know if we're talking, I don't know what numbers you're looking at, but I don't know if that applies or not in this particular case.
Thank you. I have further questions.
Ms. Taylor? anything else?
Yes, just a few questions for you. Your focus is on human bias, is that right? Okay. And you talked to us about media exposure and how that forms bias. Are bias and forming an opinion you're willing to say different things?
Bias can come from lots of things, one of which is an opinion that was formed, and then bias can shape another opinion that gets formed, if that answers your question.
It does, thank you. You talked to us a little bit earlier about how that bias gets formed, and then you told us sometimes we won't be able to spit out our entire bias or what we looked at to form bias. Is there a danger in a case like this, where there's been a lot of media coverage, that somehow we see a jury, but they start remembering things they read in the paper and trying to make the evidence fit into that filter?
Oh yeah, of course. You know, so Dr. Edelman's report, I remember, said that, you know, people didn't list everything that they recalled, but when they were prompted to ask about to indicate whether they remembered specific things, then they remembered a whole bunch of things. The same thing would happen during a trial, right? Those retrieval cues, anything that reminds you of something. So our minds have kind of an association network, and all of our memories are sort of connected in some way. You could just mention the word white, and maybe I think of snow. You know, so our memories can come up from so many things that I would be surprised if there weren't some memories rekindled.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Thanks, Ms. Taylor. Any more questions?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. May this witness be excused?
She makes.
All right. And no objection to that?
No,
All right.
you're
Okay. Thank you. You're free to stay. You're free to stay or leave. All right. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, really. It was interesting. It was just too much. I think they could have done that in 10 minutes.
Okay. Next witness.
Next witness is Dr. Brian Edelman.
Oh boy, here we go. Hope you folks all packed a lunch.
Dr. Edelman.
Don't show us the slideshow again, please. Don't.
Matt,
Don't.
is there anything in?
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
All right. Thank you, sir. Please have a seat and then please state your name and spell your last.
No more PowerPoints, please. No more PowerPoints, please. And I'm the king of PowerPoints. I like PowerPoints. We do PowerPoints.
Brian Edelman, EDELMAN.
Sir. Go ahead, Stina.
Thank you. Good morning,
Good morning.
Dr. Edelman. I see that you brought some things to council table with you.
I did.
What do you have?
What is this, show and
It's
tell?
just a copy of my presentation.
Your PowerPoint presentation? Okay. And is that face down? Perfect. Will you let me know if you need to flip it over to refresh your memory?
I can
Don't look at your paper.
tell you the second you start, I won't be able to see anything, so I'm gonna need it.
Okay, Your Honor, and counsel, then I'll ask if he can leave his PowerPoint presentation face up so he can help us understand this testimony. No objection to that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, let's start with your background.
Going back how far? I'm a child.
Well, let's start with what you do right now and then work backwards and forwards. How about that?
Okay.
You know, saying says how there is no jury. This is an argument to the bench. They could stipulate to his credentials. To have an expert witness, you must prove that he has the necessary education, training, and experience in order to present an opinion to the court. And in that, A, he's been here before, but B, there's no jury that you have to impress. It's only an argument to the court and to the appellate court. They could just stipulate to his experience, take his CV, his curriculum vitae, staple it, throw it in a pile, and say, okay, so what's your opinion here, dude? But that's not going to happen here. I hope you all folks have your dinner packed, ready to go.
I'm a trial consultant. So in that capacity, I'm often in the courtroom doing jury selections and assisting with that, running juror questionnaires, helping attorneys craft oral voir dire questions. And I also do pretrial research, so that's focus groups and mock trials. And then I also do post-trial interviews and do a lot of presentations and writing in terms of trying to educate or help the legal community. And then I also serve as an expert witness in this capacity. And in that scenario, I'm often focusing on pretrial publicity, the impact of pretrial publicity, and whether or not a defendant's due process rights may have been undermined by media coverage. And I also do post-conviction work, which kind of ties into that, where I might be brought in to look at a case to see if there was a lot of media coverage and whether or not there should have been a change of venue or a request for a change of venue, and looking at the adequacy of voir dire to uncover what jurors need. So that's kind of reviewing the voir dire transcripts and use of challenges, that sort of thing.
How long have you been doing that work?
That part, since I think the first one, maybe like 2011, 2012, something like that.
Where do you do that work? What company?
So all over the place. So all over the country in state and federal cases, Florida, Michigan, Washington, DC, Idaho, California, Texas, New York, a bunch of others. So quite a bit.
How were you educated to do the work then?
So I have a background in social psychology. So I have a PhD in social psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno, which is a program that really focused on psychology and law. That's where the judicial college is, and something called the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies. Am I going slow, or I do it better? Okay. And while there, I worked at the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies as well, and did research on the death penalty, so on pretrial release programs and the impact of media coverage, so kind of similar to this. And when I finished that, I went to England and got an LLM in international humanitarian law, and then came back here and started working at a trial consulting firm. I think I started in 2000, I want to say 2004. That sounds about right. 2000, I think. And then started my own or co-founded Trial Innovations, where I am now, with a business partner in 2011.
Do you do any teaching about your
Teaching? So I do like CLE classes and things like that for bar associations. I've done it for public defenders, for district attorneys' offices. I've been like a visiting lecturer at like different law schools, at the ASTC, which is the American Society of Trial Consultants. Did classes on like trial consulting and change of venue. I think I've done one at APLS, which is like the American.
Attorneys in most states, not all states, are required to take continuing legal education, CLE. That's what he's talking about now. In one of my jurisdictions, I am required to do 12 hours of continuing legal education every year. And so that's what he's talking about. He teaches those classes. When you get out of law school, you have a wealth of general information, but when you dive down into a particular area, it's very helpful to have continuing legal education, especially in the area of figuring out how to panel a jury. But that's what he's talking about. He teaches classes that are geared to attorneys to help sharpen skills, including trial skills.
You see, I've been like a committee that helps write some of the professional guidelines.
But I think he could have said that as briefly as I did.
And I understand you do consulting work. Do you testify as an expert?
Yes.
What states?
See, this is where I'll point out that this all could have been stipulated to and submitted to the court in a curriculum vitae that lists all of the experience that he has. He teaches, he consults, he does a lot of great things. He's obviously a very brilliant man. I'm not trying to disparage this gentleman, Mr. Edelman. He's a bright man, but they're really just dragging this out longer than they really need to.
Minnesota, and I'm sure there's others, but it's been a long time, so I've done a bunch of them. I've probably done over 100.
See, even he's kind of bored talking about his background. Most people love talking about their background. Don't you find that, Red? When you meet a new friend, they love talking about themselves and their backgrounds?
Not my friend.
No? Really?
They have like a lot of interests.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
We all got the ADHD stuff.
But don't most people like to talk about themselves? Like I do this, I do that, I listen to this music, I do that. But he's bored talking about his own background.
Yeah, you know what? I guess I could see that.
Yeah. That's all I'm trying to say.
Several comparison surveys after that hearing in Ada County, Bannock County, and Canyon County.
Before we get to all of those, I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation that you provided for us today. So you can walk me through the process of what you do and how that works. Give me just one moment.
Sure.
I have a feeling I could go down the street, get a sub, order the sub, wait for the sub, get the sub, bring it back, and I won't have missed anything. Oh no, what happened to my audio? Oh, poor man, he's having a coughing fit. The audio is tempered. It's not us, folks. It's the audio from the court. The man in the white shirt is leaving. Now, what I'm wondering is this going to be the same PowerPoint we saw before back, I believe it was in May or?
Thank you for that, for the patience. I think we have it now. Will you give us a present or an overview of what we're going to talk about today?
Yes. So the presentation is broken down into 3 parts. So the first part is just kind of a cursory review of some of the social science research, some of the basic general research, foundational research, and then research specific to pretrial publicity and juror decision-making. And then to get into the actual change of venue analysis, which focuses on the media coverage, so the extent and nature of the coverage, and in addition to whether or not that coverage has had any impact on the jury pool. So that really gets into the survey. And the last part gets into the unique challenges that cases like this pose when we talk about jury selection. So is what you're an effective remedy in cases like this, when there's been a lot of media coverage and people have a lot of knowledge about the case.
I heard you say cases like this. What do you mean?
Sorry, when I say what?
Cases like this.
Oh, cases that have a lot of media coverage. So in a normal case, like a car accident or something like that, people come in, they might have general attitudes about drinking and driving, but they don't have case-specific attitudes about this person that are well-developed from information I know about the evidence and the person and so on. When you have a case like this, people come into the courtroom with case-specific attitudes that are well-developed, And based on, it could be emotional information, it could be evidence.
Yeah, but I think what he's showing now is the cover of a book. We did a PowerPoint some time ago about how there are over 24 books out. I know people gave us our ration of you know what when we had Howard Blum on, but there are over 24 books out now, and that's the cover of a book. And I would question, how many people have read that book.
All right, let's go to the background of why we do this, why this matters.
Yeah, so there's decades of research in general
40
documenting
years.
the impact of
We're going back 40
pretrial
years.
publicity on decision making, and it kind of falls into two areas. So there's what we call field research, which is kind of similar to like a change of venue survey. So people are exposed to pretrial publicity in a naturally occurring setting. I read the newspaper, I watch it on the news or on the news when I'm cooking dinner, whatever it may be. And so we see natural exposure, and we're able to assess the impact of that coverage on pretrial opinions. But there's some limitations to that. We can't.
Yeah, Karen, I was just saying the same thing. Karen Cheney says, I feel like we heard all of this part when he was defending his work previously. And I think you're right, Karen. I mean, we've had his PowerPoint before, and it might be slightly different, but it's really kind of the same thing, isn't it?
Really learn how pretrial publicity impacts decisions, and we can't really learn the types of pretrial publicity that are most impactful.
What was I watching the other day where the person said, oh yeah, I know what it was. It was a political thing.
That's where.
And I try to stay away from politics, but somebody was saying the sequel is, one of the political candidates was saying about the other political candidate that if so-and-so gets in, it'll be the same as the first time, and the sequel is always worse. With my apologies to people that had thought I said I wasn't going to bring politics in.
Maybe the difference starting with field research.
Sure. So the one we're looking at here is one of the earlier pieces that was published, and it looked at 3 cases that were high-profile cases in California. One involved the murder of 2 police officers, I think it was in Yolo County, and then the murder of a dental hygienist from a prominent family. So it was the status of the victim was important in that. And then I believe the third one was a rape of a young girl. So the 3 cases, and they did surveys to assess the impact of that media coverage. And they learned a couple of interesting things. So they learned that people who consume news, whether they watch it on the news or they read the local paper, develop more case knowledge. So the more often I follow the news, the more likely I'm to have detailed information about that specific case. So there's the first. A lot of detail, they're more likely to think the defendant is guilty. They're more likely to have an opinion about that. And that stands out as more important than a host of things. They looked at gender, education, attitudes towards the criminal justice system, and ultimately case knowledge was 10 times more impactful, more important than attitudes like towards the criminal justice system. So it wasn't something like I'm just a pro-conviction person who tends to favor the government and think people are guilty. It was far more important than that when it came to these attitudes and opinions they develop.
It sounds like the field research has been important in your profession.
Yes.
Fair to say?
Yeah.
Help me understand what experimental research is.
Yeah, so these are more, again, traditional studies where we are able to control, we can look at types of pretrial publicity or most. Interesting study someone recently did was looking at the set aside question, and they were looking to see if you did something like normally what happens to jurors on the spot. It's just like, what do you know about the case? And it's kind of like on the spot, I need to think about it and try to recall everything from memory and spout it out right there. So the remedy was, what if the person was given time to write down everything they know and think about it, think, can they really be fair, and then come back to them and then ask them again. So they were looking at that as a remedy. So that would be an example of an experiment.
And like globally, what we find is exposure to pre-trial publicity impacts perceptions of guilt, and it influences the defendant's credibility, likability, and sympathy towards the defendant as well. And overall, most of the research shows that judicial remedies are not effective. We're talking about admonitions, so like the judge telling the jurors are not allowed to consider media coverage; they have to set that aside. Voir dire, kind of like I was mentioning before, those don't mitigate the impact of media coverage. Delay is another one. Sometimes there's a long delay between when someone reads the coverage and when they come and do the experiment to see if that mitigates the impact. So overall, those are the key findings and takeaways from the experimental research.
All right. You have a slide in here called, I'm not saying this word correctly, Potower and Singer. What's this about? How is this important?
So this is, again, just an example of some of the research. So in this study, the researchers recruited people who had been excused for jury duty, so they were at the courthouse.
Oops. Oh my goodness. So do I have to ask those questions all over again and tell our audience what they missed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait,
so
how long were we on mute?
So how come I don't know. How come you started out as red and now all of a sudden you turned into hint of red? What was that all about?
Oh, I dyed my hair brown, but there's still like a little bit up here. So now it's hint of red.
So now you changed your name to Hint of Red. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. You're not gonna go. Why did you do that?
Comedic purposes. It was a little silly.
What?
For comedic purposes.
Oh, okay. All right. No real meaning to it.
No.
That seems like a pretty high percentage. This is an experiment with two otherwise equal groups of people, some exposed to negative publicity.
I'm just really curious. You know, we're here on the East Coast, and this is way over in Washington State. Do any of your friends ever talk about this case?
Do any of my friends?
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. Do any of your friends watch true crime?
No.
No.
Well, some of them do, but I think they couldn't just bring this guy up by name.
Yeah. We we were working on a project here in the office the other day, and you were talking to some other young people and their parents, and they're into true crime, but this isn't necessarily. I guess a lot of us that do true crime think that everybody knows about this case, but here, 2,500 miles away, not so much. Not so people don't really follow. People that are into true crime don't necessarily follow this case, but you cannot move a trial, from Idaho to Boston. It's not going to happen. So,
Also, thank you.
What?
Echoes of Clarity said that they love my hair. Thank you.
Oh yeah, look at that. Echoes of Clarity. Hey, coming in to show love. Oh, you have a fan. Everybody don't forget to like the stream. Thank you, Echoes of Clarity. Yes, please. I've been remiss. I only ran the banner once. Because her hair, I love it. I think it looks great. Yeah, you have fans.
Thanks.
All right. That's good. Very important to know that. So everyone, please call your friends and enemies and co-workers and everybody, your boyfriends and girlfriends up right now and tell them what a great job we are doing here. We are following this, even though we're watching a PowerPoint now that's not that different from one we had before. At least this one, unlike the one we had before from the psychologist, has some color. Human beings tend to relate to color and to images. And so this is a more effective PowerPoint than the others. Should I turn the volume back up? Okay, here we go.
About the defendant, about the evidence, about guilt. And they're just processing evidence in a controlled setting through direct examination and cross-examination. The rules of evidence apply. So they're learning and they're developing opinion.
Thank you, Donna and Echoes, for hitting the like. Everyone, please hit the like and subscribe. Thank you. Like and subscribe. Thank you. I won't keep running the banner.
Covers, and they end up serving. They already have well-developed attitudes about the defendant. So opinions of the defendant. They have well-developed attitudes about guilt, for example. And they have case knowledge that they've already been exposed to, not in a controlled setting. So maybe it's information in this case about cell tower data, or information about a vehicle being seen on video, or what the results of DNA tests are. And it's not under a controlled setting of direct examination and cross-examination, and another expert from the defense side where they weigh all that. It's in the context of a news story. You know, there's editorial, there's public personalities, it's Nancy Grace, there's all this sensationalism around it. So they're being exposed to all that, but they're also getting the information, the evidence within that context that they're going to hear at trial. So when they hear that information, it's not new, and they're not considering it and weighing it as a blank slate. What they're doing is just activating the beliefs and the knowledge structures they have, and it's just confirming what they already know. So one side is just giving you the information I already have, which strengthens it. It makes that information more accessible in memory and so on. And then the other side is giving information that is attempting to disconfirm what I already know and believe, and it's scrutinized in a very different way, much more likely.
Yeah, we have an interesting comment here from Echoes. She says she's sharing, and thank you for showing us and helping to understand the American justice system. I beat my head on the desk. I think the issue is people do not understand our laws and how it works. Well, that's why we're here. Hopefully, any questions that people have, we're here to answer them. I think you're right. A lot of people just have a lot of assumptions, confirmation bias. People just have assumptions how things work, whether they get that from watching TV, watching movies, and anyone who's ever had a matter in a court knows that the actual, process in court in any type of a case doesn't even resemble what you see on TV. Or in the movies. I mean, people dramatize and they get consultants in to help them. But even so, the stuff you see on TV doesn't really come close to the reality. So in any event, this is kind of similar to what he said before, but it's a little bit different.
Delay. So I think it was like 5 days or something like that. And they watched a murder trial where a husband was accused of murdering his wife, and it was intentionally balanced. So it was kind of like a 50-50 split of guilty, not guilty. And what they found was that at each point in time, they would stop and do a case evaluation assessment, and people pulled the evidence to be consistent or supportive of whichever leader they had. So if they had started a case where they were supporting, they had been exposed to negative pretrial publicity, they would be supporting conviction, let's say the prosecution. So they didn't look at that evidence just for the probative value, but it anchored closer to it supports conviction. It's consistent with the belief I already have. And it was consistent like that throughout the entire study versus those who maybe had seen neutral pretrial publicity. You didn't see that. So people were more likely to consider the evidence primarily for the probative value.
How about when you've had a lot of pretrial coverage and then you have a lengthy trial? What do you know about a risk of confusing where you heard the information? By that I mean bringing in something that you heard a long time ago that didn't sound
right. And think about it based on what you were saying. These studies we're talking about an effect that was discovered with maybe 1 or 2 articles, and it still had an impact. Case like this, you're talking about inundated with pretrial publicity over a significant amount of time, repeating information, and then new information that's sensational. And so it's constantly reactivating those memories and making those knowledge structures more accessible, both consciously and unconsciously. So those attitudes are even stronger. So you would expect to see an effect like this to be even more robust in a trial setting over the course of weeks, months, or whatever it is.
Yeah, so what he's saying is making a lot of sense. I mean, if you're sitting on a jury and the trial goes on forever, or the Karen Reed trial was 2.5 months. It started in mid-April, didn't end until the week before the 4th of July. Now, if you're sitting in the jury box for that long and there are 74 witnesses, how can you remember all of that when, yes, you did read stuff in the Boston Magazine and see stuff on NBC 10 Boston? How, in God's name, can you distinguish one from the other in a long trial? And this trial, as I pointed out before, this trial is scheduled to last 3 months. The Brian Kohberger trial, according to the scheduling order, which we discussed further, is scheduled to start on June 2nd of 2025 and run until August 29th of 2025, exactly 1 year from today. So given 3 whole months of testimony, how are people going to, sort through what they saw and heard in the trial, and then what they might have seen in all those newspaper articles you're seeing there? I mean, can you imagine sitting in a trial that goes all summer? Is that crazy?
Information about the defendant's character. So those are 3 big ones. So really looking at that. In every case is different. So in some cases, it's all about the community impact, and there's candlelight vigils and memorials, and it just shocked the community. In bigger places, you don't see that as much, so it might be something very different. So it's always dependent on the case. If there is not a lot of coverage, or it's very neutral and basic, I wouldn't recommend doing anything else. So it would just stop there. If it's extensive coverage or sensational coverage or something like that, we would move to this next step, which is doing a phone survey in the venue. Sometimes we do a comparison survey, sometimes we don't. Yeah.
All right. I think you told me a little bit about the analysis of the coverage, but will you again tell me what you're looking for specific to a county before you decide to do a survey?
Actually, the main thing I'm looking for
When you're deciding whether or not to do a survey?
It really depends on the case, right? So every case is different. There's no like, I'm looking for X and is there or not. Every case is unique. Every case has, like, sometimes an example would be, maybe this case went to trial 5 years ago and there was a conviction, and then the conviction was thrown out. So really the unique thing there is exposure or knowledge that this person's been convicted is highly prejudicial. Sometimes there's a confession, and we know from the research in the Supreme Court that confessions are considered one of the most prejudicial things that could be out there in terms of media coverage, that when we talk about change of venue. So maybe that's a factor. It always just depends on the case.
And do you look at the coverage to the local area you're talking about?
Yes.
What did you find for Latah County as far as coverage?
So just looking at the Moscow Pullman Daily News and the Idaho Argonaut, I found 240 articles going from 2022 to 2024, stopping in June. So I don't know what's been published since in terms of collecting the coverage. So that's the extent of the coverage in those 2 papers. I believe I also provided the Lewiston Daily, I think it is, or the Tribune, is that right? As well, because in the survey, a lot of people mentioned they read that paper. So I put that in there as well and turned that over. And I think that was like another 200 articles or something like that.
Do you know the total number of newspaper articles you collected from those 3 papers between the dates of November 13th, 2022 and June?
Yeah, so approximately 444.
Now you've provided this chart and you have Mr. Kohberger's name highlighted at the bottom of this. What's significant about this chart that you've presented?
So one of the tricky things is always, what is a lot of coverage? So there's no decision that I'm aware of where it says, if you have X.
Yeah, thank you, Echoes, for chiming in on Donna's question. What's a Frank's motion? A Frank's motion, we saw that in the Delphi case and some other cases, and there's talk of it happening here. where the defendant is allowed to challenge the facts upon which a warrant was issued. For example, the affidavit had information that was obtained illegally, or the affidavit has outright lies in it, or was prepared by an officer who has questionable credibility. Any one of those three things are things that could go into a Franks hearing, and a Franks hearing just questions the underlying veracity of a warrant that was used to obtain evidence or make an arrest. And there have been a lot of questions as to whether there would be a Franks hearing in this case, where there have been so many questions about the affidavits that were used in order to obtain evidence and to secure the arrest of Mr. Kohberger. So good question. And thank you for chiming in with an answer on that, Echoes. Appreciate it.
Wait, hold on before we get back into it.
Yeah.
I'll be right back. I just wanted to let you guys know.
Okay. Red's leaving us.
Let's talk about how much media coverage there is. It's not just these three newspapers, is that right?
Right. So I did an analysis of the coverage that's in the declaration, which is more of a qualitative analysis. So I'm not going to go through that because that would be pretty laborious. So what I have here is looking at kind of some of the television coverage and some of the information that's been spread through more informal channels, such as social media.
What did you find?
Yes. So again, like this is really looking at what people are seeing on social media and through informal communication networks. And the reason I did that is because it's a small county, and in small counties, people talk. So people are more likely to know, rumors and speculation because people know the victims, they know the defendant, or someone's worked with somebody who knows the defendant or victim. So from my experience, you have a lot of information disseminated through informal communication channels and through social media in high profile cases.
Did you find that in this case?
I did. There was quite a bit.
What are we seeing on this slide?
So this is just an example. I went on Facebook and just did one search, which was just the search term was Moscow murders, to see what would come up. And this is what we would call a results page, essentially. So if you hit play, you can see the extent of content that's out there from groups that are just talking about this case and sharing information and discussing what they think happened, and videos and posts, which may include anything from influencers and podcasters to sharing traditional news stories through local newspapers or television stories. But there's quite a bit. And again, this is just one search.
It looks like you did a screen capture so that you could show the results from one search term.
Yes, this is me just scrolling through the search engine results page from that one search term. And what you're seeing is a combination of everything. And then if you click on the tabs like posts or groups, you would see other categories. What's remarkable is the number of groups that have been created discussing this case. Some of them local, some of them national, with, some of them have hundreds or thousands of members, others have hundreds of thousands of members. So this case has captured the public's attention.
We'll just keep scrolling for a minute. I think this goes on a little bit.
Sure. These are all groups that you're looking at right now. So these are just Facebook groups that have been created talking about this case. These are videos.
And these all popped up from that one search term.
I thought I saw one of our episodes pop up in one of those. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw one of our thumbnails pop up there. But there's a lot. There's been a lot of publicity. There's been a ton of discussion on social media, YouTube and elsewhere. But I mean, what does one expect in a case of this, magnitude? where immediately, right after the arrest of Mr. Kohberger in December of 2022, right away in the opening days of 2023, there was a motion for a non-dissemination order, and immediately all the information clamped down. I recall clearly in the 6 weeks or so between the horrible events of November 13th of 2022 and the arrest of Mr. Kohberger in the end of 2022, I believe it was December 30th, the media every single night was saying, what's happening? Nothing's happening. The killer is still loose. And then all of a sudden they, capture him. And within hours, there's a non-dissemination order. It creates a massive amount of curiosity. And so how could anyone be surprised at the volume of concern? Okay, they're taking a break. We didn't miss anything. We just that was the tail end of the testimony. They're taking a break, and let's see. Do we have to catch up? How far do we have to go to catch up? No. So the court's on break. Unless anybody has any questions, Red left the room. Yeah, Donna, that is a very good point that you're making there. Pennsylvania said Brian Kohberger was a fugitive, and it's not right. I would agree with you. It's right. Okay, Echoes of Clarity says, yes, Yoli is a great. Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask you about something she made a great podcast on, and that is PA saying he was a fugitive. Yeah, Echoes and Donna, I know exactly what you're talking about. She did a couple of episodes on that, and she replayed the press conference, which I'm glad she did. I had forgotten all about that press conference, and they claimed that he was a fugitive from justice. And how, on the one hand, can you say that Mr. Kohberger was a fugitive of justice when he was not a fugitive? He got in his car. There were no legal matters against him at that time. It was mid-December of 2022, and he was in college in Washington State, and he simply had his dad come out, and they drove back together from Washington State back to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, under no obligation to be anywhere. And the definition statutorily of a fugitive is someone that is escaping from legal process. There's a bail condition that he's leaving. There's a warrant for his arrest. There's an open case in which there are some conditions that the court has dropped on the individual. None of that was true on the date that Mr. Kohberger left Washington State. So Pennsylvania made some real mistakes calling him a fugitive. But the way they technically get around that is apparently after Mr. Kohberger left Washington and had left the jurisdiction under no conditions to which he was violating, then at that point, there were papers that were in fact filed seeking Mr. Kohberger's detention. But those were filed after he left, and at the time that he was standing in his kitchen in his shorts and his gloves going through the stuff, he had not had any notice of that legal action that had been filed in Washington, and he was not given an opportunity to respond. So without notice or an opportunity to respond, those are the main ingredients of due process. So to stretch the law and say that he was a fugitive of justice, and a very hyper-technical argument can be made that, oh yeah, papers had been drawn and filed up in Washington State. But in my humble opinion, and I think the opinion of a lot of thinking attorneys, is that no, he was not a fugitive of justice because he had not been given notice nor an opportunity to be heard on those papers. And so there's a real serious question as to whether the warrant was proper. The other thing, Echoes and Donna, the other thing that I found really interesting about Yoli's presentation was that, and she was invited to come here today, but she's engaged elsewhere. The other odd thing about that was that, why did they have to do the flashbangs and break into his house? And why did they have to break multiple windows and multiple doors? And the point is that look at the Long Island serial killer. He was apprehended in the middle of Manhattan on a sunny day in broad daylight. Law enforcement simply walked up to him on the streets of Manhattan in the middle of the day, clamped the cuffs on him, and took him into custody with no event, no flashbangs, no resistance, no show. And so, that was one of Yoli's questions. And one of the reporters in the press conference that she played asked a question about that, and law enforcement really backed away from that. They really kind of backed away from that and said that they didn't want to talk about their strategy. Strategy is a matter that we can't really discuss. And the final point, before I take a little break, is that they had something like 55 tactical vehicles involved in Brian Kohberger's arrest in Pennsylvania, December 30th of 2022. Why in hell did they need 55 tactical vehicles? And again, in the press conference, they kind of backed away from that. So my throat's giving out. I'm going to take a quick break. I don't know. Do you want to talk or do you want to take a break too, Brett?
I don't really have much to say.
I don't either. I've talked out and
Yeah.
my throat's giving out. I need a quick break, so we're going to take a real quick break. But we'll be back as soon as the hearing. You're looking live at the court's camera. This is Judge's camera. So we're going to take a quick break, but we will be back as soon as the action picks up. So please stay with us.
Delay. All right. Let's get back on the record. Thank you. We're back on the record. This is State versus Kohberger, case number CR 29222805. Counsel are in the courtroom and as does Mr. Kohberger. We had a certain break here so that we could discuss about what we want to send out to the public. But we also have to make a record on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. We're going to make sure that we have the families of the victims can observe if they want to on Zoom. Some are here. And we're going to come back at 1:30. Did I say that right, Ms. Taylor?
Yes,
You
Your
can
Honor.
correct me if you need to.
Yes, and I believe that the court will not be live streaming about the first 15 minutes after our lunch recess, and then live stream will pick back up.
Yes.
Do I understand that? But the courtroom is otherwise open?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. So it's kind of a compromise, but we thought that there were certain things that maybe we don't want to send out to the public. So I don't necessarily know what it all is, but I need to look at it and see it for on the record. So that's how we're setting this up. Okay, Mr. Thompson, anything else on that or corrections?
No, Your Honor, we appreciate the court's concern. We have the same concerns, and I think this is a reasonable way to proceed. We'll reach out to all the families.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna take a break, and we'll start up at 1:30, but the first 10 minutes will not be streamed. All right, thank you.
All right, so here's the court now taking a long break, and they're not coming back till 1:30 Pacific time, which will be 4:30 our time on the East Coast. So what we saw in this morning's session was testimony of 3 of Brian Kohberger's expert witnesses. 3 experts being the expert from TrueScope Media. He's done an extensive search of all of the media coverage of the Kohberger case in Idaho since they were retained in February of 2022. They were retained in February of 2023. Correction, February 23. And so everything since then, they were retained to take a look at. But of course, they were able to go back. So that was the first expert, was TrueScope. The second expert was the Professor Amani Alale. She was actually very interesting. As some of you pointed out here in our audience, it was drawn out a little bit. But it was really interesting testimony about the human mind and the fact that there's such a thing as confirmation bias, that once you have a view of something, you generally tend to take in things that help you with that view, and you generally tend to not take in things that don't help you of your view. And to prove that, this is me, not him, next time you have a political discussion with somebody, and we're not getting into politics, the next time you have a political discussion with somebody, note how they kind of sift through the facts. And then the third expert was Dr. Brian Edelman. We'd seen him earlier in the year when the state of Idaho objected to the surveys and the fact that surveys were being done all together. So that's it. I think what we're going to do is cut and run. It is now 3:24 on the East Coast. They will not be coming back until 1:30, and that's 4:30 here. And I have other stuff that needs to get done. As you can see, I'm in my law office. I've got to practice. I got to deal with things. And so I really appreciate those of you who have stuck with us, who came with us. We had a little bit of a glitch early on. Our live stream, for whatever reason, ditched out, but it came back. And so we've spent some time together here today, 2.5 hours since then. So I want to thank everybody who has been here. Please like and subscribe, tell your friends, share this with others. The sentiment that I get, I suppose, is that people do want us to do more lives. I don't know why, but for us, they've been a little bit of a challenge, but we are newer and we're just learning as we go along. So I want to thank all of you who have been here. I want to ask you to please like and subscribe. Please tell us down in the comments below how you think we can improve this whole process. Tell us what kind of content you would like to see. And I guess the final note is that in the horrible case of Sandra Birchmore, former Stoughton Police Department officer Farrell has been indicted. He was arrested. He is being incarcerated. Some of the facts that have been newly released are just, astonishing. And so we are working on an episode on that, and we will drop that very soon. So watch for that. Watch for your notifications. And so again, I thank everyone for being with us. I thank everyone for sticking with us. And if you would like more content, be sure you subscribe. And right now it is Thursday afternoon as we record this on the 29th of August. Summer, unfortunately, is waning. And I wish all of you a great weekend.
Whether you are in the grocery store, the gas station, or anywhere else, please remember to be kind to people. You don't know what they're going through. And the same goes for our comments section. We want you to comment, but be nice, be kind, be positive if you can. And thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Have a good one.